Rock Duck.
Hey, it's Metal Mike here, and this is the 80s Glam Metalcast. In this episode, I talk with solo artist and Savatage TSO guitarist Chris Caffery. We talk about what he's been working on recently, and we go back and revisit the Savatage days. Now, if you're big into Savatage like I am, you're going to love this one. Now, there are a few audio issues, but hang in there, they don't last. Well, Chris, welcome to the 80s Glam Metalcast. How you doing tonight, man?
I'm doing good. I'm actually enjoying the fact that we are kind of getting into a little bit of fall-like weather. I mean, we had a pretty hot spell in the summertime, so I'm in New York. Nights in New York now. I've been getting into that weather where you can open the windows and turn the air conditioner off. It's just been a lot nicer than it was the last 4 weeks, I'd say, as far as that goes. So it's getting a lot of work done, and we're enjoying the summer.
So, hey, man, I think I kind of told you before in our texting that I'm a huge Savatage nut. So let's talk some Savatage, man. How'd you link up with the Oliva brothers?
Well, I started working with Paul when I was 17.
Okay.
In the band Heaven. I replaced Mitch Perry on the Knockin' on Heaven's Door tour, and Paul was managing and producing Heaven. So I just had gotten into that. Paul was pretty much my first manager and producer, and he just started working with the Olivas. And he was in the studio doing the Mountain King record. Mm-hmm. He was like, telling me that he really thought that this band's sound, that the way he was producing it, was not going to be one that was going to sound right with only one guitar live. Now, Chris Oliva obviously is the type of person that can handle anything, but, when in that sense, when you left a double guitar rhythm section to go into a lead that on the record had all those rhythms, you were going to miss that. I mean, even Van Halen, with Eddie as good as he was, Eddie never threw rhythms on 90% of his leads for that particular reason. Mm-hmm. He didn't want us have people notice that the sound was different live than the record. So there was very few Van Halen songs on those first records that actually had a rhythm in the solo section. I mean, he was mostly just playing with Michael Anthony. And Paul got me to go out on the Mountain King tour, and I was kind of like a scientific experiment at the time, doing rhythm guitars and keyboards. And when the band was in the studio for Gutter, they asked me to join, and that's kind of what happened. And throughout that, I left kind of really. I mean, I was really young. I was 21, and my brother and I had bands when I was a kid, and my brother wanted me to get our band together. And I left Savatage to work with my brother for a lot of personal reasons on me being worried about him for a lot of reasons. And I think I just didn't understand the business at the time. I should have just stayed in Savatage and did that on the side. Mm-hmm. But of course, when you're younger, you're like, I'm just going to devote myself to one band. You look at these people now, I won't name any names, that are, playing drums in 17 different bands. It's like, I'm in this band, I'm in that band, I'm in this band, I'm in that band. Hey, it's me from this, and hey, it's me from that. I always had that attitude where I wanted to just be from one band, and that's kind of even where I've held with, for the most part, with Savatage and everything else I've done. That's why when I did Spirits of Fire, it was pretty rare for me because I hadn't taken on any other projects to be a part of till that had come around. Just because of that reason, I'm not really one of those people that wants to stick my face there and say I'm a part of 90 million different things. It's like, I toured with Metal Church, and I played with Doro, and I'll help my friends and do those kind of things. But as far as like me standing there in the band photo for 8 different bands, it's kind of not my thing. I kind of went to the solo records for that reason. Mm-hmm. It's like if I'm going to do something outside of Savatage or TSO, it was just going to be kind of doing the Chris Caffery thing and really trying to represent something else, because those bands were so close to my life as far as me as a musician and a person. So,
Chris, what about a favorite album of Savatage that you played on, and a favorite album of Savatage that you did not play on?
I probably would have to say Mountain King. That's that one. Obviously, I didn't really have a chance to play on, but that one's just my favorite one of that whole era.
It is killer. Yeah.
And as far as the other ones go, it's weird. As time goes on, I tend to lean towards mean, I really like Poets, but I tend to lean towards Dead Winter Dead for some reason.
Okay.
You know, I just think there's something about that record. I mean, Paul really hit something with that story, but the band and the music and everything that we did at that time, and there's just something about that album, I think, that, for me, I really, really like that. Of course, that's like, I like Streets and that whole thing, but, you know, I think all around, I think there's just something about Dead Winter Dead to me that hits me as one of my favorites.
Yeah, it's definitely cool. And you know what's cool, too, is that, especially like with that, and I know with Wake of Magellan, there's a lot of different stories. I know with Wake of Magellan especially, there's a lot of stories infused into one story. And I got to admit, there's sometimes that I really don't know what's going on in some of these concepts. But the songs are all so good, they can be outside of you can listen to it and still enjoy it and not really understand the concept, or you can really get into the concept and enjoy it that way. That's what's kind of cool about Savatage. Some of those songs, like I said, they can go either way.
That was the idea. That was the idea that Paul had with that music. He really didn't want it to have to have the story, but the story was there. And it was, you know, something that was very special about Savatage, and obviously something that became very special with the whole entire thing he did with TSO is those songs on those albums, they all stand individually strong, but together when you tie it in with the stories, they have something really special and really different that, you know, pretty much nothing else has. So it's definitely something that was really unique. I mean, Paul definitely had a formula that I think a lot of bands have tried to duplicate in some ways, but I don't think anybody's ever really done it with the same kind of I don't know. I think since Paul really, in my opinion, kind of was the first to do those kind of rock opera things with metal bands, I think that he really just had that formula down because he was so schooled on all the history and parts of those stories and books, but he also, you know, lived in New York City and was around the whole Broadway scene, and he just knew that part of that life was so embedded in him, so I think he just has a slight advantage on that whole entire formula when he developed it.
Two of them that I'm obsessed with, I gotta say, is Edge of Thorns and Gutter Ballet, and I feel like those albums are kind of similar in some ways. Do you see that, or?
Yeah, no, I do. I think Edge is a really very special Savatage record. I mean, that to me was like kind of the loosest, more. I'm saying loose, not as far as like you know, the playing being loose, but it was just kind of like just really laid back. Like if Savatage ever reached the point of where they were a rock and roll band, you know,
right,
like
yeah.
Thorns had that. It was like that was that attitude where it was just kind of like, you know, Savatage was the heavy metal rock band with that record, and those songs, and you know, the Lights Out, and those ones that, you know, the Dreams of Sanity, all those songs on that record, they Miles Away, they were just kind of more of, I think, and even Edge of Thorns, that was just more of, you know, kind of Savatage being the hard rock metal band, and that addition of Zach's tone being a little bit softer than John's, especially in the metal music. My dog is barking at somebody, but I think that really set that record into its own spot. You know, and Chris really played very free on that record. I think his solos were a little bit less orchestrated than some of the records before that, because he was on a mission after Mountain King into Gutter into Streets. He was really formulating a lot of things, and I think with Edge he was just kind of having more fun and just kind of jamming to himself. So that was some of like my favorite Chris as far as that, where those solos were definitely not ones that he even tried to do live the same, other than Edge the song itself. I think there was a lot of freeform stuff for him, like Ghost in the Ruins and things, where he would just, you know, play something different live, where he had that kind of attitude on Edge of Thorns with those solos.
Now, you touched on Dr. Butcher a little bit. I mean, that was obviously a cool album and definitely heavier than Savatage. And like you said, it had that sarcasm, which was cool. It was a little bit different, not as serious maybe as Savatage. Did you feel like you guys had that freedom to be away from Savatage to do those kind of things?
Yeah, you know what? It was like John had gotten out of working for a very long time with his brother, and I'd gotten out of my experience with my brother. I think we both just really wanted to have some fun. You know, we were I went down to Florida, and John was staying with a friend of his in the middle of nowhere, Florida, and I went and stayed with them, and we just started hanging out, opening bottles of Florida whiskey and Jack Daniels and writing fun metal songs. And, you know, when we played the first demos of that to Chris was like, you know, because John's voice was something that had been a little road beat when he left the band after the Streets tour. And Chris was like, how come you can't sing like that for me? Because we had some demo tapes that he heard, and actually there was a point where Chris wanted to do the Butcher thing with us. Okay. He was kind of just like, you know, he got to a point where he was like, dude, I don't know if I want to do Savatage without my brother. I should just do Butcher with you guys. And then Chris had actually asked me to join Savatage for Edge of Thorns, and I was like, nah, I'm not going to leave John. So it was just kind of one of these things where we're still all one big family, and I really regret missing those last couple of years on the road with Chris that I could have had from those tours, because he was a very close friend of mine. So I lost time with him. That was very special. I'll never get back, more so even being a part of those records. So, but you know, I never really left the family. I think there was pretty much only about a year that I was away from that band. The year of '91 was pretty much the only time I was gone. Beginning in '92, I went right to Florida and basically stayed with John, and that's when we started writing Butcher.
Why was John ultimately out of the band? I know he was still involved. Was he just sat with all the touring, or what was the rationale behind him not singing anymore for Savatage?
You know what? After all these years, I'll leave two people to answer that question, and that's Chris Oliva and John Oliva. Okay. And Chris was not there to give in his part, and John can explain whatever he has to give. I mean, there was a lot of different things. You know, John had spent a lot of time on the road, and I think he needed a little bit of time. I think that I really can't say exactly. You know, he was out of the band, and that's something that I was too. I mean, I think it's just one of these things where we both had separated from what we were doing, and we never really completely went away. I mean, John wrote Edge of Thorns with his brother. It's not like he was out of Savatage in any way, shape, or form, other than not being the lead singer for that. And, you know, he wrote and recorded almost all of Handful of Rain himself, other than Zach's vocals, and then he was back on the road on that tour, and we were all back in for Dead Winter Dead. So, you know, pretty much John had just as long as a period away from Savatage as I did. You know, I was out for my thing, and I went to John, and John was in high school, but we both were there, even though we weren't. You know, it's not when I was living down in Florida. Me and John were living together, and we saw Chris every single day. It wasn't like, you know, it was ever a separation between John Oliva and Chris Oliva. I mean, those two saw each other every day, regardless if they were playing together or not. So even when John was out of Savatage, I never really considered him being out of Savatage.
You know, and it was weird because I was obviously into Savatage before Zach joined the band, and I was really into John's voice because it's so distinct. And I got to admit, man, I loved Zach. I love Zach Stevens' voice, and it was a cool change. Sometimes it doesn't work. Vocalist, as you know, it's the hardest person to replace, but I think it worked.
No, it absolutely did, and that, you know, was a lot of Chris and Paul and John specifically writing to marry that voice too. I mean, those songs were definitely not being constructed for John at that point in time. They were writing knowing who they had singing, and they created, like I said, that really cool kind of Ray blues rock sort of feel into Zach's voice, into the metal, and I think it was a very good formula. It was still very Savatage, but it was not where Zach was ever expected to sound like John by the way that music was written. There was very, very, very intelligent writing around Zachary's voice. I mean, they changed that music to marry him, and it was a great accomplishment because they didn't make you miss John in those songs, because those songs were not written for John. John wrote those songs with Paul and Chris for Zach. They knew who they were writing it for. It's not like they had this pile of 10 songs that John did demos for. These were all songs that were written for Zach.
Now, once Savatage took a break or was done, I mean, John did Taj Mahal, you did Faces. I had Iraq Attack with John. Then there was Circle to Circle with Watching in Silence, and you wrote and John wrote, and I think you played on some of that. And I got to admit, man, as a fan, I get it. You guys want to do solo stuff, but in my mind, I'm thinking, oh my God, why couldn't this just been combined and been a Savatage album?
Yeah, you know what? I don't have. That's the one question I could never answer, because I'm here to do a Savatage record at the time anybody would ever want me to. So as far as that goes, that's another one of those questions that I don't answer. It's like, I would love to do a Savatage record tomorrow, and there's different reasons why things have never timed itself out to happen again. I think the world misses Savatage. I know I do. And we're all here. Obviously, we would never be able to completely recreate the magic that happened with Chris and Paul and John. I mean, that's 2/3 of the largest part of many of this writing combo of Savatage are angels of ours now. So we'd be able to write Savatage records, but I don't think it would ever be exactly the same. I mean, even John digs out some of his old recordings that his brother had written that he hasn't used. I think there's a part of that I think maybe John and even the ghosts of Savatage kind of want to maybe let that rest, away from that, just because there's such a huge important part of that whole entire chemistry of that band that's not there. Those people that don't think it's Savatage without Chris. So
yeah.
If you have Savatage in that sense, it's kind of one of these things that if it's going to happen and it's meant to be, it will. But if it doesn't, I mean, there's a whole lot of magic that came out from that band, in that time, and it was very important to the history of metal. It's kind of, in a lot of ways, like the Beatles and Queen and things like that, where they'll never be the same without the John Lennons and Freddie Mercury. It's kind of one of these things where Savatage would never be the same without Paul and Chris Oliva. And I think, maybe in some ways it's better for us to just keep the legacy alive with the music in a lot of the ways that those bands do. But, I don't make that decision. I'm around if anything was ever to happen.
Mm-hmm.
But I just know that I was very fortunate to be a part of it. I mean, if I had not been lucky enough to get into that heaven thing, I probably wouldn't be speaking to you now. I don't know where my career would have went.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure I would have wound up in the music business, but I definitely don't think my life would have went that course to where I would have been, working with somebody like Paul for 30 years and going through all the magic that guy created, in Savatage and TSO. I was very lucky to be a part of that part of musical history. It's a big chapter in metal and in hard rock and arena rock. It's like I was blessed with the ability to be a part of something really special.
Now, kind of explain Paul's role, because, Paul just seems like an equal member. Was that kind of how it was, even though he just wasn't in the forefront?
Yeah, I mean, he definitely was more than I've worked with bands that had the quote-unquote producer before. A lot of times it's some guy that just came in and said, oh, I hear this chorus, maybe you should put the script from the verse here and do that. And okay, cool, man, that's great, babe, that's great. That kind of like freaking Hollywood producer sort of vibe. But it's like Paul definitely, he could have worked for any band that he wanted to, and he chose Savatage for a reason, because he saw something in that band that was very special. He saw the Oliva brothers, and he knew that the magic that was involved with that, and he did, become like the fifth Beatle in that sense with that combination. It was just something that was really unique, and the writing chemistry between the Oliva brothers and Paul, that continued on with John and Paul. I mean, John Oliva and Paul O'Neill were a really magical writing team. There was something to those two. I mean, John was able to come up with the music behind those, beautiful lyrics and things that Paul had for all those ballads, and it was just the thing that happened all the way around. I mean, Paul was definitely more than a producer with Savatage. He was a lot more than a producer with that band. I mean, obviously, TSO was his baby, so there really wasn't a whole lot different in that sense. We were creating TSO music, and it was Paul and John, and I did my writing and Al did his writing, but that was still that same combination. So it's like Paul had always had a very huge part, more so, like I said, than regular producers would. I mean, he'd be a part of our live shows and what we would do with production on stage and lights and sound and just everything about it. Our videos, he would direct the videos of Savatage and that those visions of that, the gutter ballet and when the crowds are gone videos. I mean, that's all Paul's vision in those videos. It's not like me and John and Chris were out on the gutter tour and freaking going, hey, we have this idea. We're going to get this theater in Rockford, Illinois. We're going to film when the crowds are gone. It's like, no. Paul and Neil called us up and said, hey, guys, you're doing another video. This is where you're going. So he definitely was, a member of that. We were all family, and Paul was a huge part of it.
Well, let's talk about your last solo album, man, The Jester's Court. That's a killer album. I dig the diversity because you'll have a lot of straightforward metal songs, but then you'll throw in something like the song like Protect My Soul. Just a little different, It's a cool album.
I think that Jester's, I just went back to the formula that I had with Faces, which is just me having fun. When I first did my solo records, it was really kind of to fill in the space of there being no Savatage. And I discovered that I could sing, and I was like, wow, I'm actually able to sing. And I never thought I was a great singer, but I just never really wanted to deal with, like I said, another band. So I just made this music myself. And then going out on the road and doing the solo band was really stressful. I mean, all the responsibility went entirely onto me, for everything. The paying to set up all the tours and this and that. I finally started to understand on a very small scale what it was like to have the pressure that Paul would have, before a TSO tour, having to put things together. It's a lot of stress when, you're that important to everything that happens around there. And, when I wanted to go and play, it was just one of these things where financially it was a little bit stressful for me, and business-wise it was stressful for me. So I just kind of got to a point where I was like, well, TSO was playing, and we started playing more and more, and I was just kind of was like, you know what, I'm going to take some of the pressure off this, and I just took a break from doing the solo records and tours. And then when I did the Gestures album, that kind of was like an escape for me away from after Paul passed. I really dove into writing that album with a lot of the emotions that were happening to me, losing someone as close as Paul. And I think that if I didn't do that record, I might have been pretty damaging on myself physically. So I went in and just kind of went back to that same mood of the Faces record where I just wanted to grab what was inside of me musically and put it onto an album. And I like all different kinds of music, so it's not like I only pick one that I want to play or write. I have a lot of different tastes for music and things, so I like putting them onto that. And I think that the Jester's Court record had a lot of that Faces personality in it.
Yeah, definitely. And it's funny, when you mention TSO, because of all of us, nuts who love Savatage, it's always going to be Savatage first. That's what, we knew it as Savatage, but it really, it is funny when you see these giant concerts and it's all the guys from Savatage. I mean, it's pretty awesome, man. I got to say, it is very awesome.
Yeah, no, exactly. Yeah, like I said, it was a very, very, very special band, and I was really fortunate to have that part of my life. It's many, many years. If you look at some of the careers of, like, you look at how fast there was a Beatles. It was, less than 10 years in that.
Yep.
And you look at the fact that, Savatage had a history with themselves, but my history with Paul and Don and everything, it went over 30 years. It's kind of a crazy amount of my life, more life than I was alive, time of my life I was alive without Savatage and Paul is not there. I mean, the most years of my life were spent with these people and this family, and it's definitely not a bad thing. I was very fortunate to have all these guys as part of my life.
With Spirits of Fire, real quick, what was it like working with Tim Owens? Because I've read interviews with him. He's a big Savatage nut himself.
Yeah, no, I am really good friends with Tim. We did his first solo tour together, which actually happened to be the last tour that Ronnie Dio was alive on that Heaven and Hell tour. I played with him, and I had met Tim back when he first got into Priest, and we've become good friends, and then Savatage opened for Priest, so when I got approached to do Spirits with him, that was one of the main reasons why I said, hey, I want to do this, because it was kind of more like me getting a chance to do a record with my friend, and he's just great. You know, he's one of the great metal voices of our age and our generation. I mean, he puts him up against anybody that it sang in the past 20 years. He just has that really strong, really solid voice that never goes anywhere. I mean, I toured with Savatage and Priest for 6 weeks, and they were doing a pretty long set list every night. Sometimes it was 6 nights a week, and that guy's voice was there every note of every night.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And he's definitely a very special vocalist.
Well, Chris, thanks so much, man, for your time, and thanks for all the years of the great music. Really appreciate it.
No, thank you. Thank you for your time, and I'll talk to you later. Thank you.
Well, that was a great episode with Chris. Well, guess what I'm going to tell you to do? The same thing I always tell you to do. You got to subscribe.